Living a life in full is a conversation you always wanted to have with that person who gave an amazing TED Talk, or the author of one of your favorite books, or that inspirational Olympian you always wanted to know more about. It's graduate-level conversations with those making a difference in the world and in the lives of others. This show brings you new ideas and approaches so that you can live a life in full. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Stout, and I hope you enjoy this episode. This episode is sponsored by our new video course, How to Publish in the New Millennium, from scientific journals to bestsellers. It's an asynchronous course offering, so you can watch it when it's convenient for your schedule. It's based on 8 video lessons and provides 3 hours of material with new concepts, stories, and examples, and it includes several attempts at humor. You'll learn about the best ways to submit a manuscript to a peer-reviewed journal, the mechanics of book contracting, what publishers are looking for, how to evaluate and negotiate a contract, royalties, advances, copyright, and ownership, why to never first submit a manuscript to a publisher, when you need an agent and when you don't, and the differences between publishers. You'll learn about ebooks, print on demand, Amazon's CreateSpace and KDP programs, and other non-traditional approaches to publishing, along with how to tell if a platform is of high quality or not. We do a deep dive into marketing, how to create media kits and what goes into them, along with examples, how to create a great Amazon author page, how book signings work and how to be invited to do library talks, and the economics of both, along with developing speaking engagements, promotional tours, and being a podcast guest, as well as a number of other publicity aspects. We cover blogging and provide additional resources to help you in crafting your work and making it better. This is a rich, fun, and fact-filled course that covers everything you need to know from a practical and actionable perspective. It's for anyone wanting to get their written work into the world, be it academia, popular media, or both. Join the masterclass in getting published. To learn more, please visit tinyurl.com/gettingpublishedcourse. Thanks. Welcome to another episode of Living a Life in Full. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Stout. Dr. Hassan Tetteh is a decorated Navy captain and associate professor of surgery at the Uniformed Services University of Health Sciences and an adjunct faculty at Howard University College of Medicine. As a cardiothoracic surgeon, he was deployed in Afghanistan and on warships in the Persian Gulf. He's also an unabashed medical nerd, as part of a cadre of physicians also board certified in clinical informatics. He was selected a 2019 Emerging Leader in Health and Medicine by the National Academy of Medicine. Currently, Dr. Tetteh is a thoracic surgeon for MedStar and Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, where he heads the Specialized Thoracic Adapted Recovery, or STAR team, in Washington, D.C., and his research in thoracic transplantation aims to expand heart and lung recovery. A native of Brooklyn, Dr. Tetteh received his B.S. from State University of New York, his M.D. from their Downstate Medical Center, his M.P.A. from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, an M.B.A. from Johns Hopkins University Carey Business School, and an M.S. in National Security Strategy with a concentration in artificial intelligence from the National War College. He completed his thoracic surgery fellowship at the University of Minnesota and advanced cardiac surgery fellowship at Harvard Medical School's Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. Dr. Tetteh is founder and principal of the Tetteh Consulting Group, creator of the Art of Human Care book series, and a best-selling author of several books, including Gifts of the Heart and Star Patrol. He's a board-certified thoracic surgery, general surgery, clinical informatics, and healthcare management, and is a fellow of the American College of Surgeons, a fellow of the American College of Healthcare Executives, and a fellow in the American Medical Informatics Association. Dr. Tetteh received the Ali Sheridan Award by the Thoracic Surgery Foundation for Research and Education, was named a TED Med Frontline Scholar, and is a TEDx speaker. He's an alumnus of Harvard Medical School Writers Workshop and Yale's Writers Conference. Welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
Chris, thank you very much for the kind introduction. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I'm excited
It's very impressive, and I'm excited as well to have you on. For those that may not have seen it, there was a recent piece in the Wall Street Journal, and it noted that you had one of the coolest sounding jobs in medicine. So I have to reprise it here, and it's Warfighter Health Mission Chief for the Department of Defense Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, or JAIC. Can you tell us more about what you do there and what the center is about?
Oh, sure. Well, that is was a great compliment paid to me by Alan Ripp, who wrote that wonderful article in the Wall Street Journal. So certainly one of the highlights in my career to be recognized by that great periodical. But that came about, like many things in my life, through serendipity, divine intervention, and maybe a bit good luck, or maybe all of the above.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and so, many people ask, well, how did I get that job, and how did I wind up where I am? I think a lot of it goes back to what I do in healthcare, and my clinical sort of background is really the genesis for much of what I think I do today, and the pursuits and interests that I've had. So as a cardiac surgeon, and those of us that have been in cardiac surgery for many years know that you can imagine this is a very high pressure type of intense specialty, subspecialty, I should say, in surgery. And we take, our outcomes very seriously. And so there was something that was created by my colleagues decades ago called the Society of Thoracic Surgeons database. And if you can imagine, cardiac surgeons tend to be a sort of a profile in the quintessential type A personality, and we love data.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in cardiac surgery, the stakes are high, or fortunately, the stakes are high. And so when they are high, our outcomes matter, and that if we have a bad day in the operating room, our patients are going to have a bad day in life. And
Yeah.
so because of that, many decades ago, as I mentioned, my colleagues started to report their outcome data. And so those that were doing really good, obviously, would share what they were doing to have good outcomes, meaning low mortality, more morbidity, and do something that's very hard, stopping the heart, putting patients on bypass, fixing their hearts, and then getting them to recovery. And as we started to collect all this data, we started to realize that there were certain things that the good programs and those that had really great outcomes were doing. And it wasn't that the patients or the surgeons that were having poor outcomes or worse outcomes were not doing anything better. It's just that they were not doing things the same way. And as we started to look at that data and analyze things, we established this database. And so over decades, all cardiac surgeons started to sort of do much better because we were sharing this information and this data. And so that's really the beginning of where I started to see that information, especially a lot of data on a lot of patients, could lead to really good outcomes, because you started to follow the things that the patients that were doing well and the programs that were having good outcomes did, like giving less blood, giving antibiotics for certain cases before you started, just different techniques in the operating room. You start to see that, you could learn from this data and you can improve outcomes. And so when I learned about clinical informatics as a subspecialty years ago, I was all in. It made perfect sense to me. I said, well, yeah, absolutely. Taking information, looking at data, and applying technology to make our work better. And there's a subspecialty for this. This is just an extension of what I've been doing all my life in cardiac surgery. And I saw the outcomes, and I saw, what it did for cardiac surgery. I mean, if you think about what we've been able to achieve in cardiac surgery, heart transplants notwithstanding, lung transplants notwithstanding, to stop someone's heart, routinely fix it, and then bring them, back to not only health, but better health than they were before. I mean, that's one of the modern miracles of modern medicine.
Right.
And yet we take it for granted, but that came about through due diligence, data analysis, and rigorous and dedicated work from a cadre of surgeons that were really focused on getting better. And they got better by looking at what worked and what didn't work. And so informatics to me is an extension of that. So fast forward, you said, how did I get this job? Well, I dedicated a lot of study and focus and time to becoming board certified in informatics, because again, it just seemed to me to be a natural extension of what I was doing in cardiac surgery. And I said, wow, you could apply this across all of medicine. There's absolutely room for improvement in every area of medicine when you look at data, and when you look at what you can gather from information and outcomes for patients, and then see what worked and didn't work and make it better and improve it. And so that led to an opportunity to become, believe it or not, the the chief clinical informatics officer for Navy medicine, the chief medical informatics officer for Navy medicine, the entire Navy
Wow.
medicine enterprise.
Wow.
And because I had this, great opportunity to go to the War College and had an opportunity to focus on writing a thesis on artificial intelligence, when the JAIC was established, the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center at the Department of Defense, at the sort of national level, at the epitome of our national defense apparatus,
Mm-hmm.
the recognition that artificial intelligence was one of these technologies that we needed to continue to lead in, and we needed to lead in the future to ensure not only our national security, but also to make sure that we were going to provide the policies and sort of the roadmap for how we would apply this technology across the world. They recognized that in health, there was an opportunity to have a mission within that construct, within the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. Military medicine would benefit from, having a dedicated mission that was going to be able to use, leverage, and apply artificial intelligence to improve the health of our service members and give us an edge in national security, and to make sure we had a ready force that was always able to be successful in missions. And so I was recruited into that position. And so it was a long-winded way of answering your question, but it came about, principally speaking, as a result of just following my passion and doing what I knew had always worked, at least in my experience in cardiac surgery, which is looking at data, taking that data, learning from that data, getting insight from it, and improving your practice, not only personally, but professionally and sort of throughout the community of cardiac surgeons.
Wow.
So
that's great. It makes so much sense hearing you, kind of describe it with the interest that you have in data and outcomes. And, my background is a little parallel track. I mean, one of the things way back when dinosaurs walked the earth, and my background's more so psychology and psychiatry, no one really looked at outcomes in those areas. And it was just sort of everybody sort of had their theoretical canon. You were a psychoanalyst, or you were a Jungian, or you were a whatever. And you kind of just, you like if you had a bad outcome, whatever that might be, it was the patient's fault. It wasn't because of a variation in therapeutic or therapist's ability. It wasn't because, my therapeutic approach can beat up your therapeutic approach or anything. And it was sort of finally really early 70s, 80s, and then starting into the 90s that people actually started looking at outcomes and measuring outcomes. And I think for you, perhaps, so correct me if I'm mistaken, but it seems like, in the more, cardiac and cardiothoracic kinds of areas, one of the things, like, you're not going to do a randomized controlled trial on a patient. Someone's they're in need. You're going to help them as best you can. And you kind of have to take all comers. You can't say, well, I'm going to, I've got exclusionary criteria. I'm sorry, sir, you have diabetes, so I'm not going to be able to, have you be part of my subject. So can you speak to that? Because I think that's one of the amazing things where AI can kind of come in and help us, sort through some of those kinds of things. That it's not these super clean, N of 100s. These are N of thousands, but also with a boatload of comorbidities and other kind of complicating factors. How do you sort through for that in your specialty with clinical data and informatics?
Oh, Chris, that's an excellent question. I mean, it gives me goosebumps thinking about the question and my answer in response to that, because you're absolutely right. I can see absolutely incredible and powerful application of AI and data analysis to exactly the same question that you just posed. So you just said, a scenario, you just highlighted a scenario that happens, every day in our practice. Like you said, when you are individually taking care of a patient, that patient is in front of you and they are looking for your help, right? And they have a cardiac condition.
Mm-hmm.
But invariably, because they have a cardiac condition, they probably have some comorbidities. They may have some diabetes, they may have hypertension, they have a family history. They have, poor exercise habits potentially, or just poor genetics, and so now they're faced with this challenge, and they're coming to you for help and assistance. And in their mind, because I've been in the patient's shoes, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
you don't care about the statistics and all of the
Right.
data.
Yeah.
All you're worried about is how are you going to help me with my problem. But as the clinician, as at the provider, and especially as a cardiac surgeon, you have to take into account this myriad of all of these other factors in addition to their underlying condition and problem with their heart to sort of come up with a good treatment plan for them. And this is where, we pay a lot of, platitudes to this thing called informed consent, right? But I can tell you it's because of this database, right? And this years of decades rather of collecting information that we can now actually with almost precision accuracy tell a patient that is undergoing a pretty significant cardiac condition what their risk of mortality and morbidity is going to be based on a lot of data and we've gathered over the years. And so we can come up with something called an STS risk classification and a score. And it can go down to, pretty high fidelity numbers in terms of saying, well, if you were to have this procedure, given all your comorbidities, you have a 5% or a 10% chance of having a complication. You have a 1% or 2% chance of death. And we can share this information with patients. And you obviously do this in a very careful and a very thoughtful way and a compassionate way. But what it does, I think, is it helps to, put in context and characterization what this patient is about to undergo, both for the physician, the provider, and the family, so that they know what to expect. And I think it's been invaluable for us because it starts to set expectations for patients and their families, so what they can expect, right? And most people, I'll tell you, when you're straight with them about that, they're like most people going to be optimistic about what their chances are, but at least they'll be realistic as well going in. And I think it does an incredible amount of building trust and also engendering a lot of confidence in the patient-doctor relationship. So that's what the data has done for us. And now you can imagine, you overlay the power of artificial intelligence, which is taking a lot of data, finding patterns, and being able to give you insight into those patterns, how incredibly invaluable that could be, right? As we sort of advance and mature this technology and this application of this really powerful tool. And I call it a tool. It's not going to be a panacea. It's not going to save or make everything better, but it's going to help enhance the way that we deliver care. So we can start applying the right kinds of therapies, technologies, and therapeutics to the right patient at the right time. And I think that's where AI is going to really play a big role. And so, I think, Alan Ripp and the editors at Wall Street Journal aptly called the article that they highlighted there as how AI can make your doctors smarter. That's what I think it has the potential to do. Not replace your doctor, but make your doctor smarter. And I'll give you another very practical example of this, maybe outside of the realm of cardiac surgery, but just as a doctor and being posed with the question, like many of my colleagues are often faced with, on a daily basis. So while I was at the War College, it was a 2-year stint there. So the first year I was actually the doctor on campus. I was called a command surgeon. And sort of as a reward or punishment, depending on how you look at it, you get to go to school there the following year. so this is an appropriate story because it actually, highlights for me in my mind and reminds me of why it was that I decided to dedicate that year while I was a student to artificial intelligence. So I had a colleague of mine who you appreciate this. He was the clinical psychologist on our campus, and he was, leading a lot of our behavioral health initiatives on our campus and doing really great work. Super fit guy. I mean, the guy looked like a Boston marathoner. I mean, strong, fit, healthy guy. And but he had a family history of heart disease. And I remember one day I was in my office and like we often did, sort of late afternoon, we would just have this sort of banter talking about all kinds of topics. And he came in one day and he was very concerned because one of his family members had a heart condition. And he said, he was having what he wouldn't call symptoms, but just some discomfort. And, it was very vague kind of things. Like he said, when I do certain things, I have this chest pain. And I also have, this sort of feeling. And then I kind of feel like a flutter. And so is a constellation of a bunch of different things. But in an otherwise very healthy, seemingly fit looking individual.
Mm-hmm.
And he posed a very simple question to me. And he said, "What do you think that all means, Hassan?"
Oh
And I'm
boy.
thinking to myself, like, all right, that's a damn good question. And
Yeah.
I don't have a damn good answer for you. And I feel bad that I don't, because
Mm-hmm.
you're quite concerned about it. You're a very healthy person. And I would be concerned if I were in your shoes too. And I
Yeah.
felt, Chris, I felt inadequate that I didn't have the answer for him,
Mm.
because I'm like, he's describing symptoms that if you took individually and in a different kind of clinical picture and presentation, you would say, well, no, that's clearly a heart problem, or that's clearly a musculoskeletal problem, or that's probably nothing at all. But here
Yeah.
he was, very anxious about it, family history, and a constellation of things that, individually didn't mean a lot, but maybe collectively meant something. And in that particular presentation with that family history probably meant a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have the knowledge in my mind, in my little peanut brain, to figure out what it was that was what was causing all of this, right? And I thought to myself, and this could be incorrect, obviously, but I thought to myself, I bet there's some case study somewhere. Someone over the over the history of medicine
Sure.
probably wrote about some set of symptoms that this person is presenting with, just the almost exact same picture of what he's presenting with the family history, and said, you should consider this as a possibility for this condition. And perhaps not. Maybe it doesn't exist, but I don't know if it does, right? And I
Yeah.
can't go through the entire PubMed
Right.
PubMed library
Yeah.
and go over petabytes of data and figure out to find out one needle in the haystack and say, hey, I know what's wrong with you.
Yeah.
Dr. So-and-so wrote about this very condition back in 1820 something, and I didn't have that information. And that's when it dawned on me that, the power of AI is that it can help me be a little bit more effective
Mm-hmm.
at answering that question. And that's really, I think, Chris, for that, it was that afternoon, I remember vividly because I have notes written down about it, that I decided when I had the opportunity, I said, you know what, I'm going to look into how AI could be applied to help, a physician like myself have a better answer for my friend, instead of saying, dude, I have no idea what's going on with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's when I started to realize that, what AI can do is it can take a lot of information. It can automate the collection of data. It can optimize the analysis of data, and it can highlight patterns. And those patterns can give you insight.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk about developing algorithms and things like that, that's just another level of giving you that kind of insight that can help you to make a better decision. And I know there is lots to talk about, and there's lots of controversy, and there's lots to be concerned about when you talk about applying that kind of technology and that kind of tool to something that's very personal, something that's very, very important, something that's so critical as healthcare. But, I think people should look at the upside of that, right? I think a lot of people actually are very pleased that Netflix can give you a suggestion for a movie you may like based on a bunch of patterns that they
Yeah.
recognize from your
Yeah.
viewing habits. And wouldn't it be nice too if at my disposal, when my friend asked me that very important question to him, that I had in my hands, there are my fingertips, a number of different possibilities that could explain what was going on with him. And then I could take that information and I could apply that knowledge, that new knowledge now, with asking some more probing questions and maybe even ordering some more diagnostics that maybe, would bring me closer to giving him a better answer than, dude, I have no idea what's going on with and so
Yeah.
that's, at its core, that's to me where I think AI can have a very, important role in helping us to deliver better healthcare. And
Yeah.
that's what excites.
Yeah, absolutely. It sort of reminds me of kind of like thinking about the There used to be the little books that you could like fit into the pocket of a lab coat of like
Right.
neurology for the house officer or whatever, like when you're doing whatever rotation and all of a sudden you got something that, seems like neurology, then whip that one out and you kind of look at it and you see the pearls, here's an interesting case study or whatever. But to take the power of, 100xing times, clinical studies and case studies to be able to have that at your fingertips, because you can't, like you said, you can't just go to hop onto PubMed and 10 minutes later, have the definitive answer. And I think one of the promising things, because there's a lot of overlap you read about when you're looking at AI in medicine with predictive analytics and with personalized medicine. And it seems to me, I mean, my simple-minded way to think about it is to say we've got this trove of searchable data that a machine can go through and scrub for, looking for certain kinds of patterns, as you've noted, and then take that and look at it maybe, with the N of one quantified self to the patient that's sitting in front of you and say, okay, we're going to take all of this that we know from the literature and studies, and now we're going to scrub this against, your family history, your, current lab tests, your
Right.
Fitbit data from the last year, whatever it is that, someone brings or doesn't bring, to the clinical waiting or the exam room, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Your genetic makeup even.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing that kind of drives me crazy with this is that, it's just like with COVID, which is wouldn't it be great if we already had this database that we could just easily get all the answers to our questions with a, 95% certainty. And it's sort of like I have done some stuff with genetics and SNPs and whatnots. And there's a great database called SNpedia. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. We can put it in the show notes for folks that are interested in the audience. But it's basically kind of this periodically updated database, like a Wikipedia. But the fact that, there's going to be studies published tomorrow that have not been published today that are going to have, add to the data, add to the knowledge, bring in, X thousand more patients in, and we'll know more tomorrow than what we knew today. And the fact that a lot of these, either they're free or they're very inexpensive to access, I think will also be, one of the key places that we, I hope people smarter than me can then go to as they're developing these algorithms to be able to, to trawl or to scrape or to search, to be able to start to get those kinds of things out there. So, you talk about, you start off with the like cardiology and big data. And it's been fascinating in my evolution to kind of go from almost a hubris of randomized controlled trials and remarkably small ends to kind of what we go to today. And I moved from being primarily in behavioral health to then also getting into sports medicine and orthopedics and stuff, and worked as running a department there looking at data analytics. And I went from like being tickled to have an N of 100 over a course of a year to having 23,000 patient visits a day through this orthopedic practice, a national practice. And, then I went to clinicaltrials.gov. We developed 2 patient registries. Can you talk a little bit more about either from or both the military side of patient registries? And because I know that there's like a treasure trove of data there in the Defense Department, and then anything else like with other patient registries that you're familiar with, or, with clinicaltrials.gov, and what promise you think that those might hold for the AI colleagues of ours.
Yeah, I think it's all wonderful, actually. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
think you had in your own experience what I think many of us are going to experience, in future generations, and they'll probably look back at us. And I used to joke around, I still do, with my residents and my colleagues in cardiac surgery. And I say, someday, for many years from now, maybe not even many years from now, they'll look back and say, you guys were doing what? You were ripping veins out of people's legs and cracking their chest open, and
Yeah.
like, what were
Yeah.
you what were you thinking, man? That was craziness,
Barbaric.
It's all right. I mean, it's functioning and it's working now, but maybe people, years from now will discover that, oh, you know what? Because of these registries, because of different kinds of experiences, we may find that, oh, perhaps there's, and we do know this to some extent, obviously, that there's some dietary modifications you can make that can actually reverse some cardiovascular disease that you might have. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's a better way maybe someone will create a wonder drug that can, melt the plaque away. Who knows? But the point is, these registries, and even more importantly, some of the crowd sourcing
Uh-huh.
and some of these sort of platforms, and I'll highlight one because I got to meet the developers as well as some of the leadership in this organization. Patients Like Me, for example, right,
Right. Yeah.
where you have an entire community, right, of individuals all across the world who have a condition. And not only that, Chris, they're living with this condition every single day. So unlike us in healthcare, or even in a clinical trial, even in a randomized clinical trial, where you're seeing that patient episodically, right, over a course of 5, 6, maybe 12 months, and you're seeing them for visits that last maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours, these people on these platforms are sharing information and data and observations about their condition 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
And they're sharing things with the community of like-minded folks that unfortunately are suffering from the same experience that they are. And they're telling each other, hey, this has worked for me. I've tried this, I've tried that. And that, I think, is a rich and I think often overlooked source of information that could actually help contribute a lot to the body of knowledge that we have for treating patients with different conditions. And that's why I think you see, and I know patients that have had chronic conditions, and I know my own patients that have had chronic conditions that will place a lot more confidence in those kinds of forums than they will with things that I'm telling them. And why? It makes sense, right? Because they're like, well, you know what, doctor, you've only seen maybe one or two of me in your whole career. I'm on a chat, or I'm in a forum with hundreds of people that have the same condition that I have. They've been told to try this and it didn't work for them, but yet, they discovered this or they discovered that and it's working for them. And you know what? I tried and it's working for me. And I applaud that. When that happens, I try and support them and I try and give them information to help their journeys to health. And I don't discount those things because I think they're very important. So when you talk about the randomized clinical trial, they're great, right? But they're also not without flaw because sometimes they don't have a very diverse patient population.
Sure.
So even though you may glean an insight or may say, yes, this is the right path for this condition, or this therapeutic is the right way to treat this population, you may be missing a whole swath of the population just because in that clinical trial, they didn't have a particular social demographic. They didn't have the right genetic composition. All of those patients happen to be from the Northeast and not in the Pacific Northwest, or
Right.
whatever it is.
Exactly.
So there are some limitations with even that mode of data gathering. But I think that if you look on the horizon and the future, what's to come, I think we're going to get insight a lot more rapidly because people are walking around with supercomputers in their pockets, and that those supercomputers are collecting a lot of data, whether we want it sometimes or not to collect that data. It is collecting the data. And when it comes to trials and to gleaning insight for what may work or may not work with patients, I think you'll find that, these platforms like A Patient Like Me, or in your practice, in your experience of seeing 23,000 patients over a short period of time that are all having, very similar kinds of therapeutic interventions performed on them, and then being able to have the ability to follow up with them very dynamically, you'll start to see what works and don't work and doesn't work. You'll say, hey, wait a minute, you know what? These people do very well with a 6-week course of rehabilitation as opposed to what I thought they needed, which was 9 months or whatever it was.
Exactly.
Or, what, we need to apply these techniques as opposed to others, and we may get better outcomes here. Or we know that this absolutely doesn't work, and in fact may cause more harm for patients that are undergoing these, therapies. So I think the future is very exciting in that regard, because I think it's only going to be better in terms of how we gather, how we synthesize and analyze and gain insight from this information that before we largely didn't have access to. And again, I'm not being Pollyannish about some of the potential hazards with gathering all of this information and gaining sometimes the wrong insights from it. But I do believe that the good in these cases will far outweigh the bad. And I think what we'll hopefully get at the end are more and better ways of treating and caring for patients, and hopefully doing it in a way that's more affordable, that's a little bit more effective and hopefully more efficient.
Yeah, well put. It's what you say makes me think about it's we would all love to have the magic bullet, the easy button, and to say, okay, if we just throw some AI at this and an algorithm or two, then we'll have the magical answers, and life will be rainbows and butterflies. And I think there's sort of the meta aspect of what you're saying too about patients like me, is that there's also a nice here's my psychology coming out, but it's also nice support. It's a nice kind of way to get feel not alone with whatever the disease or illness or issue is that the one's dealing with. And I was at a Stanford Medicine X conference years ago where I first learned about them, and some of the speakers there, like one guy was a data scientist. He wasn't an MD, and he was a data scientist talking about what you were saying by virtue of the fact that his daughter had, a terminal or, a poor prognosis kind of illness. And, stitching together those kinds of things, I think are hugely important. And I've just recently been working on a project in digital therapeutics, getting an FDA approval for a project, and it's interesting to me. And again, it makes me feel like I'm a Luddite or something. But it's you think of FDA and you think of randomized clinical trials, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And now there's, at least in this space that I'm specifically focused in terms of more so digital therapeutics and behavioral health care, is looking at what real world data that you can submit for approval from the FDA for clearance using real world data, as opposed to having a controlled group and doing kind of the traditional specific orthodoxy of pharmacotherapies and drug development. So I think we'll learn a great deal from looking at those kind of patient, organically organized, and like you said, carrying around their own little microcomputers with them to be able to look at data, and then if a couple of apps here and there, and getting those data back to their healthcare providers and whoever else they're involved with, I think will be a big boon to what happens. I want to circle back again and keep my psychology hat on. One of the things you talked about in that article that's involved with Jake's is the Project Orion. Can you share a little bit about that for people in the audience that may not have heard about it yet?
Yeah, sure. So that I must say it's a collaboration from multiple different agencies within the Department of Defense and quite frankly other intergovernmental agencies, getting after and addressing, as you say, putting on your behavioral health hat, a problem, a challenge, and an issue that's been a big problem for us here in the country and certainly within the military, and that's suicide, and of course behavioral health, depression, and all of those things that come with it. And so, regrettably, and certainly the pandemic has probably exacerbated things with isolation and loneliness, and also just the other stress that comes with just living in this time of a global pandemic. More behavioral health issues and challenges that people are faced with.
Mm-hmm.
And what we have tried to do in the department, and what we've tried to do in healthcare writ large, is to prevent suicide. I think everybody, knows and understands the tragedy that suicide is, not only obviously for the individual, but those family members and friends that they leave behind. And there are always these questions that are asked. Well, why? And could we have avoided this? Could we have prevented this? Right. And mm-hmm. So suicide prevention is something that I think many people have dedicated their lives to addressing. I've had my own colleagues, friends that throughout my medical career at different levels, medical school, residency, fellowship, that have committed suicide. And mm-hmm. and when I reflect on those lives that are lost, I've done the same thing. I've asked why, how could that have happened? Like I didn't see it coming. Yeah. And so when you think about everything we just talked about, we're looking at data and looking at patterns and trying to gain insight. Project Orion and many of the initiatives within the department and with healthcare in general are looking at ways to take information on individuals, information on populations, and see if we can find triggers or patterns or recognize things that may be hints, if you will, mm-hmm. to provide a path to intervene on one's behalf to hopefully prevent a tragedy or prevent someone going down a path of a destructive behavior that may lead to suicide or worse, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's at its core what it's all about. And you know, we have a lot of information on the folks that you know we have just by way of medical records, by way of service records, and we, you know, with care and security and privacy all in mind, and taking things in aggregate, we are looking for patterns that for us are even the ones that beyond the things that are usual suspects, relationship problems, financial problems, you know, problems at work, to see if there are other triggers that could potentially give us some insight into saying, hey, if you identify an individual that has 1, 2, 3, or several of these factors that we know have been identified as things that, you know, these people that have committed suicide all share in common, we may want to intervene on that person's behalf, ask them how things are going, maybe get them to the appropriate help, and provide them the resources that they may need so that they can prevent, you know, a tragedy from befalling them. One thing that I will just share with the audience, which is you know, something unique to the military, which I think gives us perhaps an edge in this sort of endeavor, if you think about it, is the fact that in the military, and this is unique to the military, it's not like something that the civilian sector does, and I only, you know, learned about it somewhat recently, actually, is that in the military, if one commits suicide, you know, depending on which service they're in, there is a complete and very comprehensive investigation that occurs on that individual. And it's almost like a forensic analysis of one's life.
Wow.
You know, tragically, unfortunately, you know, triggered by the fact that this person committed suicide. And so, you know, we look at a person's record, they look at their social connections and you know, their service records, where did they deploy, where did they get assigned,
wow.
health issues, you know, and things like that. And, you know, it's done obviously because, you know, in the military, for someone to commit suicide, it's a big deal. And we want to try and learn from this experience to prevent it from happening again. But as a result of this investigation, what comes of that is a report. It's a very comprehensive report. In some cases, depending on the individual and the circumstances, it could be several hundreds of pages.
Wow.
And if you think about it, right, that's unique to the military, because most times in the civilian sector, if someone committed suicide, the investigation will just go so far as to make sure it wasn't a homicide or foul play or something other than what it seemed to be, which was a suicide. And that's pretty much it. And the report will be filed, and it may be just a few lines. But when you think about having a comprehensive record on a number of patients, in this case, it's a lot of patients, unfortunately, where we're looking at a lot of different aspects of one's life for people that have actually committed the act. They haven't attempted, they were not, you know, people that were unsuccessful in the act. Regrettably, they were all successful. So you think about this as a resource of information, at least for this particular population, in the military, that can be used, you know, to help us identify patterns and recognize trends that we may see among this population of individuals that have regrettably, you know, committed suicide. Perhaps give us some insight into helping our commanders, our leaders, our healthcare providers, our behavioral health professionals to say, hey, when we identify, you know, triggers that we notice are sort of shared in common for this group, financial trouble, sometimes relationship issues, moves, deployments, you know, all of the things that are, you know, very well identified as triggers for cause of stress. We can be a little bit more in tune to being receptive and of course proactive in helping individuals to give them resources, provide them with some tools, and hopefully help prevent them going down a path where there's destructive habits that are sort of adopted, and worse, suicide that's committed.
It'd be interesting to see the, you know, of those that were intervened with, to see, you know, if that, you know, did help, you know, mitigate whatever the issues were.
I think it would be, no, I think that's a great question. I think it's important to note here too that, you know, this is a very difficult and challenging problem. And certainly we don't have the panacea, but what we're trying to do is address a very serious problem that, many people have not been successful at addressing,
Right,
right?
right.
Not only military, I mean the world.
You're right.
Everyone, almost every society and almost every community is faced with these, tragic events. And what we're trying to do is, again, use information and what I would argue is a fairly unique kind of resource
Mm-hmm.
to help, give us some insight into some of the things and some of the, maybe identify some patterns that you know, could help us to be more aware and
Yeah.
hopefully a bit more active at addressing, the challenges that people may be going through that may lead down the path of suicide.
That's fascinating. It's like a digital phenotyping, I mean, it's like being able to
Yeah,
have those markers and so to speak, and,
yeah,
and kind of through a process of like a psychological autopsy as opposed to
yeah.
a
So
physical or,
it's fascinating that you use those
yeah.
words. I bet it's because of your background. So that is one thing that I will say has been a breakthrough. I would call it a breakthrough because again, it's something that we identified. Our team, our very talented team of many professionals working on this, identified as a unique attribute that we have in the military, which is this sort of repository. And so one of the things that we came up with was a bit of a way of quantifying or maybe presenting this data in a meaningful way that can be helpful.
Yeah.
So you talked about an autopsy tool. So taking all of this information, one of the things that's being developed now, and it's certainly not complete at this point, but what's being done is they're taking these reports and looking at patterns, and they're developing and kind of like a psychological autopsy tool.
Uh-huh.
If
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah.
and I don't want to use the word inappropriately, but if you think about why we perform autopsies in healthcare, right? We do that because there may have been a cause of death that was not clear, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so use our pathologists to perform what's called an autopsy, which is they'll look at the deceased and they'll not only do a gross anatomical survey, but they'll do a microscopic one and sort of examine organ by organ what could have contributed to this person's demise.
Mm-hmm.
And from a psychological standpoint, right, it would be hard to do that,
Right.
physically,
Yeah.
but from a behavioral health standpoint, especially if you have information that we do have in some of these reports, you can kind of go through just like you would in an autopsy and look at some of these aspects of one's you know social circumstance, professional circumstance, and see if there are things that could have given you some insight into why this person unfortunately committed suicide. And
Yeah.
so I think it's an area where there's some novelty, and of course, the audience may be thinking, well, where's AI come into that? Well, think about hundreds and hundreds of pages per individual. Unfortunately, thousands of people that have committed suicide. That's a lot to go through.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can apply AI like natural language processing, which has been in part responsible for us to be able to just Google things, right? And figure out
Mm-hmm.
at our fingertips how we get to, all of the knowledge that's been digitized. It's because there's a computer that has been trained and algorithms that have been developed to be able to find keywords out of a myriad of text. And that same kind of technology can be applied in this circumstance to look through those reports and do so in, I think, a more efficient and sometimes a bit more effective way than any one individual, even team of individuals.
Sure. Yeah, I was first introduced to a software program called Atlas TI, and it was looking at refugees into the United States from Kosovo, and it was in psychiatry at Department of Psychiatry at University of Illinois College of Medicine, and it was fascinating to me. I mean, I was very naive to this. This is some years ago, so I'm sure it's much more robust than what it was back then. But it was just this whole idea of taking patient narratives and looking for, similar choices of words. And this is after going through proper, translations and whatnot with their native tongue, etc. And it was fascinating. Like you said, I mean, we keep circling back to, like pattern recognition and to be able to see these things. But you're absolutely right. To have these kinds of statistical, analytical kinds of tools to be able to do that, there'd be no way a human could do it. There'd be no way a therapist, even with 1,000 patients, it's just beyond, human capacity. So, well, I want to circle back, if you don't mind. We'll get back to AI. And the audience doesn't need to worry. But I can't let you go without talking a little bit about your early years. In doing my research, I found that you were a aspiring graffiti artist. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Okay, Banksy.
That is correct. Yeah.
Well, tell
Well, yeah, I grew up in Brooklyn. I always like to tout where I come from because I think you can appreciate this as a behavioral health person. Where you're sort of indoctrinated into early life. I think has some influence over how you live your life moving forward.
Sure.
My wife and I were talking about that. And for good, bad, or indifferent, depending on how one I guess reacts to the environments in which they grew up in. So. And I grew up in a Brooklyn that's a lot different than the gentrified version of the Brooklyn that people know today.
Sure.
And for me, it was not only a test of mettle, but also one of survival and also provision of great survival skills.
Yeah. Yeah.
But from that experience, there were some really great highlights of my early childhood and teenage years in the city. And one of those was, this very creative, very dynamic art form called graffiti, which, maybe depending on how you look at it nowadays, especially I think, being an adult now myself, probably didn't see that as much of an artistic expression more than just vandalism and probably a bunch of a nuisance. But back then, graffiti art was very ubiquitous, I would say, all over the city.
Uh-huh.
And for me, it was not only just the actual art form and the coolness of doing it with the spray paint and the markers and all that went along with that, but it was this social connection of knowing other artists and learning about them and knowing about them and learning about them through their art. But then, in my case, sometimes meeting them and be like, oh my gosh, that's so-and-so. And oh my gosh, I saw that mural that you did. I saw that work that you did. And so there was this kind of like community that I belonged to. And, as a teenager, I really embraced it. And it was like a sense of belonging, and I was part of something. And I wanted to go to art school. And in fact, I got accepted to Art and Design High School, which is in New York, which is a competitive art school, very good art school. You had to, actually have a portfolio. You had to, go there and actually have a drawing test and an exam where they sat you down, they gave you different objects to draw, and they would look at it and grade it. Wow. So I got accepted, and I'm very enthusiastic because this was going to bring me even closer, because a lot of graffiti artists went to Art and Design at that time, and some of the best ones actually graduated from there. And I was like, now I'm going to be a part of it, and I was going to take a train from Brooklyn to Manhattan every day and go to school. So it was very exciting, and all of that enthusiasm quickly got curtailed when I shared with my West African immigrant dad that I wanted to be an artist.
I can imagine.
And he said, nope, that's not going to happen. You're not going to be any artist. You're not going to make any money as an artist. And I also got accepted to a technical science school, Brooklyn Tech. And he said, you're going to go to science and engineering school instead. I think you'll have a much better job prospect there. And so. Now, he was partially right? Because we both know artists that are doing much better than many scientists ever will.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
But maybe from a statistical standpoint, the odds of doing okay as a scientist and an engineer is probably a little bit better than the one-off artist.
Your dad was just predicating this off the data and looking probabilistically, right?
Exactly right. Exactly right. He was like, well, chances of you being a world famous artist while you're living.
Yeah, right. Yeah, critical point.
Probably a lot less than you going to science and engineering school and becoming a scientist or an engineer. And and truth be told, Chris, at that time, I still, like many kids, and especially if you're a child of West African immigrant parents, two of them. you had already been indoctrinated into you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer.
Yeah, yeah.
So I sort of vaguely had that interest anyway, so it made sense, and I didn't protest too much. So,
Well,
but I never gave up, my affinity to art, and that's why, many years later, fast forward, not only was I able to go into a specialty, which I think, involves quite a bit of creativity, and that is being a surgeon.
mm-hmm.
And of course, you hear a lot about the art and the science of medicine, and there
Yeah.
truly is an art to it, especially when you deal with individuals who are unique in their own way. And then of course I had, recently the opportunity to start a book series around the genre of art and call it The Art of Human Care. And that has,
That,
way for me to bring all of these things full circle and bring them all together.
I know
So,
it's, and I want to, that this is a wonderful natural segue to that. One other thing before we get into that, is that you had another very, I mean, well, I guess let me just circle back even to the graffiti. I mean, thankfully to your parents and to whatever other kinds of events transpired in between. But the blessing that it is that you've taken the career path that you have, and the lives that you've saved, and the lives that you've changed, and continue to do so. So I just want to not blow by that, but I mean that's something really to to make a highlight and to take credit for, and it's wonderful and not an easy path that you've chosen. But you also, if I can maybe kind of play psychologist again here, one of the tipping points, or turning points rather, for you was an undergrad where you nearly died. Do you feel comfortable sharing that story? And was that kind of one of the
oh
springboards
no,
into medicine?
that was absolutely not only a springboard, but I definitely a springboard that led to, at least me in my analysis, the type of medicine or type of doctor that I believe I am. And had it not been for that experience in undergrad, which you just highlighted, which for the audience, what happened to me in undergrad was pretty consequential.
Mm.
Your podcast is aptly called "Living Your Life in Full."
Yeah.
Well, I would say, that many years ago in my teenage years as a junior in undergrad, I was not going to have a full life for sure, because I contracted bacterial meningitis.
Oh,
Ironically,
gosh.
after coming back from an interview for medical
Oh,
school, which
God. Oh, my gosh, Hassan. Jeez.
so
Oh.
so here I was in my proverbial deathbed, because for the audience, even now, with all we have in modern medicine, if you have bacterial meningitis and you get it severe enough, as I did, it could definitely be a death sentence.
Right.
And there's not uncommon for many young people and very old people and everyone in between to die from bacterial meningitis every year. And so I
Mm.
had it. I was even incorrectly diagnosed initially, but fortunately given, the right therapy, albeit in much smaller doses than I needed, I was diagnosed with a stomach flu when in fact I
Oh,
had bacterial meningitis. And it
gosh.
had not been for some friends and fraternity brothers of mine that found me sort of almost on death's doorstep,
Wow.
in the
Oh,
dorm room,
Hassan.
and
Oh,
took me to the hospital, I would not be here having this conversation with you. But the good news is that I survived, obviously. And the good news is that experience, I will tell you, for anybody that has ever been on the other side of our healthcare system,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and not the delivery part, but the receiving part, it will be an experience that changes you. And I'm not talking about the going to visit the doctor or going to the ER, or, for going get, because you had a sprained ankle or something. I'm talking about like knocking on death's door, one foot in the grave, another on a banana peel,
Wow.
tenuous, tube in every orifice, that kind of experience on the
Mm-hmm.
receiving end. You quickly realize how vulnerable you are. You're vulnerable, you're anxious. And even as an invincible, teenager, I was like, I was very nervous. I was
Yeah.
scared for my life. I didn't think I was
Gosh.
going to survive. I wasn't even aware of what was happening to me half the time, because I spent several weeks in the hospital, and much of that summer after recovering. But what it did engender for me was this deep sense and appreciation, and I think gave me an empathy which I would have never had for my own patients once I became the doctor. And when
Mm.
I started
Hmm.
around and see patients on the other side, so to speak, in the bed, in the ICU, intubated, with their family members around,
Gosh.
understanding what it
Oh.
felt like. be in that situation, I know it's given me an incredible sensitivity, and as I said, an empathy that you can't learn in a textbook, right?
Right, right.
You have to,
Yeah.
everyone is supposed to be nice in medicine, but there's one thing about being nice in medicine because you read about it. There's another thing about being nice in medicine because you remember being in that predicament
Right.
and knowing and remembering how those people that were really nice and compassionate to you made you feel, and they made you feel great. They made you feel good. They made you feel hopeful.
Yeah.
They made you feel like, oh, what, I'm going to get through this, and I want to make my patients feel like that.
That's
And that's been a it's been a very an important part of the kind of physician that I am today, even so many years after that event. I mean, that happened decades ago, but I can remember like it was yesterday. Every time
sure.
I see
Yeah,
one of
of
my
course. Yeah, trauma's like that. So
I can realistically say, I know how you feel.
yeah, yeah, no placating. So were you pre-med then?
Well, I was. I mean, I was an undergrad. I was a biochem major,
Okay.
and it was my junior year. I actually, like I said, went for an early decision look at Hopkins.
Uh-huh.
So I got an interview. I ultimately did not get accepted, but I like to always say I got my poetic justice back from Hopkins because I went back to got my business school degree from Hopkins, and I've been
Wow.
on faculty and work with their staff there now. But yeah, they in their infinite wisdom decided to reject me after my meningitis bout.
Gee, great. I'll be back.
I'll be back.
Ay, ay, ay.
But it all worked out.
Good, good. Yeah, to the benefit of us all, especially you. So, I have a few more questions. Are you good for time?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, awesome. I do want to circle back now to the Art of Human Care series. What spurred that? I mean, we've talked a little bit about your artistic abilities and beginnings and stuff, but I also heard you subcontracted out the illustrations to somebody else for some of your books with this. Can you tell us about that and
Yeah,
tell us about
I did.
the
So
whole idea?
yeah, absolutely. So that idea came about as a result of, I think, you can't hide the inner artist once you have one, right?
Uh-huh.
So the inner artist was
Nice.
always, and I have a daughter and I have a son, and my daughter, more so than my son, had always expressed this, artistic affinity, and I loved her drawings, and
Oh.
and I know most parents say, "Oh, I love my child's drawings." I really loved my daughter's drawing. So she was just like really just gifted at it.
Uh-huh.
And I told my wife, I remember early on, I said, well, if she ever wants to go into art, I'm not going to dissuade her, even if she has to stay on our payroll for the rest of her life. I remember what my dad did to me,
That's
but I don't
great.
do that.
Oh, I
I
love
don't want to do
that.
that to her. So
Oh.
Chris, so I actually, she was 8 years old at the time. I remember this very, very well because I said, hey, Ella, at this point I already wrote one book. I had wrote my first novel at that time, it was Gifts of the Heart, which I wrote after I got back from my deployment.
Uh-huh.
And I was thinking about, like many artists do, like, what can I do next? What do I do next? And so I was thinking about it, and I came up with this art of human care concept. And I was like, how neat would it be to have art in the book, because art is so healing, it's so therapeutic. And I started thinking about how art is like in every aspect of hospitals. There's music, there's sculptures, there's paintings on the
Right.
wall, and it's
Sure.
this universal thing that people just feel good with art. And I mean, just think about it, people like have their favorite song, they have their favorite poem, or they have their, so I just thought to myself, there must be a good way to fuse this. And as I started looking into it, I was like, wow, there really is a body of work on art and healing. And so I
Hmm.
told my daughter, who was 8 at the time, I said, wouldn't it be neat? Her name is Ella Blue, and I said, wouldn't it be neat, Ella, if we wrote a book together and you drew the pictures? And as an 8-year-old, she's, I don't know what kind of answer she gave at the time. It to me was a yes. So I was like, good. We're gonna work on this. And so 4 years later,
Oh.
the first one came out, and Ella drew all the hearts in the book, and
Oh, I love
she
that. Oh.
yeah, so that's what started it. So, and of course I was like, wow, we got to do this again. There was a good reception from it, and I said, let's work on another one. And so I had these ideas for these series of books, And because COVID occurred, the timeline and sort of the order of the books got a little bit
Yeah.
upended,
Yeah.
like I'm sure nothing like that happened to anyone else. But yeah, COVID threw a little monkey in my plans, and so I found myself, sort of sequestered and hunkered down, but also impacted tremendously by COVID, both personally, professionally, and thinking to myself, well, if there's ever going to be a time where an incredible body of art is going to be produced, it's going to be during COVID, at least for our generation.
Yeah.
And so let me contribute to that by writing another book, and then also, infusing great art again into this work. And so, I found a number of artists. I told them what I was trying to do. And I mean, beautiful art, I think, came out of it. And so that's incorporated into the Art of Human Care for COVID. And then I also follow that up with the Art of Human Care with artificial intelligence. And I found an incredible digital artist that, really sort of, I think, saw my vision and manifested it in some really cool pictures that sort of juxtaposed the words in that book. So there you have it. That's how that came about.
That is so awesome. I love the kind of the integration of these different kinds of things into your work, and how you've described how whatever kinds of experiences, if they're traumatic with, being sick at age 20 and having greater empathy and bedside manner than maybe what would have been without that. And, again, thank goodness for surviving it. And then the whole aspect of art. I loved your point, if she's going to be on the payroll, let her be an artist. I love that. It speaks to not only your humanity, but also being a great dad. So I think that's wonderful. That might be a great way to wrap up our show. But before I let you go, for people that are interested in getting a hold of your books, learning more about your work, etc., what are some of the ways that people can go about doing that?
Yeah, great question, Chris. So I definitely invite and love interacting and learning from other people, whatever their work is, and happy to answer questions on my journey, so to speak. So two places, being digital people nowadays that would sort of give insight into what I'm doing and the work that I have is Art of Human Care website. It's just Art of Human Care, all one word.
Okay.
And there you see all of our books. And then, of course, I have my own personal website, which is drtetteh.com. And that's doctor is spelled out doctortetteh.com. And, of course, as I mentioned, artofhumancare.com.
Great.
So those two places.
Good. I'll make
and
sure.
Of course, we have, and from those, you can launch into our social media and Instagram and all those kinds of other platforms. But those are like the two great starting points, so to speak, into the world of Dr. Tetteh. So.
Excellent. Good. Well, I encourage people to go exploring around in there. I certainly have. And you're also, you appear in a variety of other places as well, too. So that's good. It's good to be connected this way. But anybody interested in this, please check out our show notes. We'll have that in there as well, too. And again, Hassan, I just want to thank you for making the time today. My gosh, you have like the most incredibly busy schedule of anyone I can imagine, with all the different responsibilities and things that you're involved with. And you still have time to be able to share yourself with us and with the audience. And I very much am indebted to you for doing that. It's great to be in touch with you and get to know a little bit more about you and your background.
Well, thank you, Chris, for giving me the opportunity to be on such a great platform and to contribute in any way to your audience's inspiration and inspiring them, hopefully, to live their full life and live their life in full. So I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
My pleasure. You're quite the inspiration. Living a Life in Full is a production of Stout Media, a subsidiary of Gordian Knot, LLC. Assistant producer, Gracie Wong. Music, Dan O'Brien. Executive producer and host, Dr. Chris Stout. To learn more, stop by our website, A Life in Full, for show notes. And please recommend us to your friends and subscribe on your favorite platform. And as for the obligatory disclaimer, this podcast is for general information uses only and does not constitute the practice of psychology, medicine, nutrition, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical or psychological advice. No doctor-patient relationship is formed. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, I take conflicts of interest seriously. For all of my disclosures as well as show notes, please see livingalifeinfull.org/podcast and my LinkedIn profile. Thanks, and until next time.